Today I'll be looking at why even 1.5 million in retirement savings might not provide the security many people expect. Over my years helping clients plan for retirement, I've seen firsthand how tricky it can be to navigate the "do I have enough" question. That's exactly why I'm making this video today, to show you why 1.5 million might fall short of what adjustments you need to make to ensure your retirement remains secure. Let's get right into it. Okay, in today's video, we're looking at a case study of some soon-to-be retirees, Jeff and Margaret. They are 57 years old. They're gonna retire next year at age 58, at least hope to. And up to this point, they've saved $1.5 million for retirement. Now, this number for them was kind of a magic number. Over Jeff's career, he's used a rule of thumb that if he can save 10 times his salary, then he would be ready to retire. And he read that somewhere. And frankly, there's a lot of financial institutions that put out measuring sticks like that. You know, save 8 times or save 10 times your salary, and then you'll be ready for retirement. So now that he's met that mark, he's looking at whether or not retirement is possible. And as he considers some of the expenses and things that'll change when he retires, he's not sure whether that's going to be enough for them to have the type of retirement they expect, what they'd like to do. As he considers things like travel, as he thinks about especially healthcare and just, you know, the cost of living. Also, he's really concerned about the idea of retiring so young and whether or not his portfolio is going to be able to keep up with inflation and last for the rest of his life. He's also in a little bit of a tricky situation because they have 2 adult children. Both of them are out of the house. They're in school right now, but they are still helping him a little bit financially. And the number one thing is both of their children, who are 21 and 23, are still on their health insurance plan. And so as he's thinking about all of that, he can't find, how to reconcile what he's reading online about how much he has saved using things like the 4% rule. And there's just no way that he can see in his mind that he's going to be able to realistically make this happen. So for that reason, we're going to go through some of the things that I would go through with an actual client to help them understand just how prepared they are or are not for retirement. And so that's really what I want to do in this case study, is kind of go through some of those questions and then look at the details of their situation to help you get a sense of questions that you should probably be asking yourself. And even if obviously all of these things don't apply to your situation, I think it'll help open up your mind to some of the things that you maybe should consider. So let's get into those questions and we'll go from there. All right, so with somebody who's about to retire, one of the first questions I'm going to be asking is, all right, when do you want to retire, would like to retire? Or another version of this, when do you want to transition to a work optional lifestyle? Often I find even, especially with what I'd call an early retiree, or even just kind of more of a traditional retiree, people want to retire, but they often like to keep the door open to going back to work. Not necessarily for financial reasons, but just, because sometimes people enjoy work, or they have enough self-awareness that they realize they might get bored and they may choose to go back to work. So really looking at this as whether or not they would be forced to go back to work, for financial reasons. So when do they want to retire, or at least have a transition to a work optional lifestyle? Other questions I would ask is, have you looked at your Social Security benefit estimates? And what are those numbers? Now, for Jeff and Margaret, they've both worked, so they both have Social Security benefits. I'd ask them if they have other income sources that they are expecting in retirement. So this would be things like, if you have a pension that you're expecting, or your spouse does, or do you have a rental property or properties that you're going to get income from? Other things of this nature I might ask about is, do you expect to receive any inheritance from a family member? It's somewhat common. It's something to be considering as well. The question I would ask is, with your portfolio right now, 2 things about their portfolio is, how is it currently invested? And then a second question would be, what is kind of the account breakdown? So how much of your total retirement savings is in retirement accounts like IRAs or 401ks? How much of it is invested in things like a brokerage account, or just, in cash or CDs? How much of it might be in like Roth IRA accounts? The types of accounts that you have are going to impact the taxation of that portfolio in retirement. So it's going to definitely fit into the picture for, what to do for their situation. Next question I would ask, and it's something that is already on their radar, is health insurance. Especially if you're retiring before age 65, I'd want to know, Have you looked at your health insurance options? It's not very common that people have retirement healthcare benefits, from a former employer. It is. I've seen it before, so it's worth asking about. But even if it's not the case, have you looked at health insurance? Have you kind of mapped that into your planned expenses? And do you already have a plan or a sense of what that's going to cost? So want to know about that. Now, with that as well, especially with early retirees, you might have, if you have adult children that are still on your health insurance plan, even if they're not, living with you, then we need to consider that because it can factor in obviously to the total expense of your health insurance, and importantly, when you're looking at qualifying for health insurance subsidies, the number of people on your plan will impact the amount of income that you can report and still qualify for health insurance subsidy. So it's very important for planning that we look at that as well. Other questions I would ask is not. I'm not a huge fan of asking, what's your retirement budget, but if somebody's already kind of put a lot of thought into how much they think they're going to spend, I'd love to know that. Do you have an expectation of what you want to spend? And are there any kind of, are there other financial goals or priorities or changes in your lifestyle that you really want to make sure are part of your plan that we've accounted for? The last thing that you want is to retire and find that you don't have money to do anything and you're just kind of, trapped in your house because you can't afford to do other things. So want to make sure that, at least we can maintain a level of lifestyle and allow you to do the things that are frankly part of most people's retirement plan, like travel and that sort of thing. And with that, I always like to look at what is your current income. In my mind, I always like to kind of reconcile someone's spending expectations for retirement and reconcile that with what they're currently earning and saving. And usually just as kind of a quick, sustainability test. If somebody's expected spending is pretty close to what they're spending now, then it's usually just kind of at a surface level, pretty good shot that their spending expectations are realistic. And then also, what they're saving. So for retirement currently. So, what are you earning? How much of that money is going away into savings, towards retirement and other things? And so having that information is very helpful. It also comes into play for taxes, for some tax planning, especially for somebody who might be, they're going to be working maybe a couple more years before they retire. There's some really great tax planning that can happen if you start mapping out your retirement plans a couple years before you stop working, for tax planning purposes. So with all that information, we can now look at what is their spending capacity. So before we even look at, okay, what's your desired budget and all of your goals, we can look at their financial assets and say, all right, if we just map this out, given some conservative and hopefully realistic expectations, what's possible? Like, what can you realistically spend and not run out of money? Part of this as well that I would want to ask a client is, how important it is for you to leave a certain amount of money or legacy to your children. And some people that's very important, others it's not. It's not my job to say, it's not a right or wrong thing, just really understanding someone's preferences so that we're accounting for it. And if adjustments need to happen, we can just have realistic expectations. So with all those questions to start with, now let's actually look at their scenario and look at how looking at these different questions impact their retirement plan. All right, so on the screen in front of us, what we're doing is looking at a plan overview for Jeff and Margaret. And I'll point out some of the things on here and usually some of the things that come up most often with clients and people that I meet with over YouTube about their retirement spending plan. So here in this top left corner, we have the projected balance. So we're looking at them retiring next year. And so, we're assuming they have 1.5 million today, and we're assuming a little bit of growth in their portfolio between now and then. Now, how that's broken down, they have $1 million in a pre-tax IRA account, and then they have $500,000 that they've saved up pretty aggressively over their careers because they've had the plan of retiring early, and so about $500,000 saved up in stocks and cash in a brokerage account. So with that $1.5 million portfolio, their planned retirement paycheck is $11,000 a month. Now, what that's made up of, they not only have their portfolio and Social Security income, but they also have a rental property that brings in $3,000 from that they're able to spend on a monthly basis, after their expenses and everything that they have to pay to just take care of the property and maintain it. So of that $11,000 a month, it's about $9,000 of that total amount that will be coming from their portfolio. And there's about $1,000 that's going towards taxes and other things. So 11,000 net after tax. Usually the first reaction that I get looking at a plan like this is that someone feels a little bit of disbelief thinking, well, that seems like a really high distribution rate for a portfolio of 1.5 million. What this ends up being is about a 7.5% distribution rate from their investments. And if you've looked at anything online, specifically like the 4% rule, right off the bat, you're saying, hey, that's about double, the recommended rate. Well, this is one of those rules of thumb that frankly is outdated, and it does not account for modern retirement planning. And frankly, even over the last 10 years of working with retirees, building retirement income plans, it's just something that most people get hung up on. So the reason why somebody can almost always start out their retirement taking a larger distribution from their portfolio is, for the first reason, is that they don't have to do it for their entire retirement. Usually, people have other income sources. In their case, they have the rental property and they have Social Security income. So they have the rental income right away, but then later on when they claim their Social Security benefits, a higher percentage of their total monthly income will be provided by Social Security benefits, which means that we can front load and spend more from the portfolio early in retirement, because later on in retirement, they're going to be far less reliant on the portfolio and their distribution rate is going to fall way down. And so that's why we can have a distribution plan like this. Heavier in the beginning, lighter later on, and it ends up working out really well. The second rule of thumb, or the second reason why a higher distribution rate is usually higher than people expect, is because we're using something called a dynamic spending approach in retirement, using something called guardrails. And what this allows us to do is it allows somebody to start with a slightly higher distribution rate if they're willing to make small adjustments throughout retirement if the market is up or down. So I'm going to show you 2 screens to illustrate how retirement guardrails work for a dynamic spending plan. So here on the screen, what we have on here on the left, this shows their current retirement portfolio. So just over 1.5 million projected for next year. And then correspondingly over on the right, this shows their monthly spending that is sustainable based on that portfolio. So you can see the number here is higher, 12,300. That's because this is the before tax amount. Their monthly net spending is 11,000 a month, but this is also including the taxes that would be included in that. So this number corresponds with this number. So what the guardrail approach shows, or what it essentially does, is it gives us guidelines for when someone might need to make an adjustment up or down to their spending and the magnitude of that change. So, if your portfolio drops, does it mean you have to completely stop, kind of go underground and hunker down and spend nothing? Or, what is the level of that adjustment that you ought to make? So here on the bottom guardrails, we go down. What this is showing us is, what if your portfolio dropped by about 30%, $450,000? Well, what would that correspond to as far as a slight adjustment in your spending to stay on track, to stay on the highway? Well, what that would mean is lowering your spending, reducing it by about 5% per month, and that would provide a little bit of a buffer for your portfolio to be able to recover and stay on track for retirement. Now, on the flip side, we also have upper guardrails, and believe it or not, that's one of the most common, I would say maybe the most common issue that I see with retirees and their spending over time, is the reluctance to spend more even when they have the capacity to sustainably do so. It's like all the time. This is the biggest issue, especially over the last 15 years, where the market has done really, really well, and portfolios generally have done, for a lot of people, have done far better than they expect. People find themselves in a situation where they end up with a lot more money than they expected. They can spend more. Maybe they've even liked to spend more, but they don't, out of fear. So what the upper guardrail gives us is a responsible number to say, all right, I can spend a little bit more sustainably, responsibly, without, putting my financial security at, in jeopardy. So here, the upper guardrail, you can see that, a small increase in their portfolio by about $80,000 or 5% Correspondingly, they could have about a 5% increase in their spending, about $600 a month. Now, I do want to highlight that for this plan, we've already built in cost of living adjustments. And so that's already worked into their retirement spending plan. So these are adjustments above and beyond retirement, just year-to-year cost of living adjustments. Okay, so looking at this, you might be in a little bit of disbelief thinking, well, that just seems like far too high of spending over time. So I want to look at one of the neat things that we can do is look at historical examples to maybe kind of further fortify or steel our minds towards our plan and have more confidence in it. So what we can do here is we can actually look at how this plan how it would have fared if Jeff and Margaret had retired right before the great financial crisis. Now, the market dropped over the course of a year and a half by about 50%. And so you would think that, my goodness, given that, drastic of a drop in the market, probably their retirement plan would have fallen apart. Well, here we can kind of back test it and see how it would have done. So on the screen here, we're just looking at basically from 2007 up through the present day. And on this screen in front of us, the first line that we have is this solid line, the solid dark blue line, which shows their actual income, what they could be spending. And the shaded blue kind of behind it, it's very faint, but what that is showing is the planned income. So we start out, we're going along, and you can see that we hit this blue dotted line, and that's just, the planned cost of living adjustment for the plan. Now, interestingly, in the beginning of the great financial crisis, there wasn't much inflation. The economy was in the doldrums, and so inflation in many aspects was not very high. Although I'll tell you this, I do remember during this time, I do remember gas prices being very, very high for about a year. Kind of, I was driving at the time, and that was something that I noticed, although I wasn't in my career at that point. So as we go along, you can see that we then hit in another cost of living adjustment for inflation in 2012. Now here you see this green dotted line, and what that's showing is that their portfolio by this time had recovered so much that they had actually hit that upper guardrail, to where if they had if this retiree wanted to, they could actually get a cost of living adjustment above their normal amount. They could get an extra raise to their spending. And then we go along, they would have hit another one in 2017, another one in 2020, in 2021, and then a regular just cost of living adjustment in August of 2022. Now, this is showing their spending over time and how those adjustments would have happened. Now I'm going to go down and we're going to look at the actual portfolio balance. So this is showing in real time the guardrails in action. So we can see that solid blue line, that's the balance of their portfolio on this graph. And the upper green is showing, that upper guardrail when they could take a raise. And then the red shaded area is showing that lower guardrail over time. Now you can see that for their guardrail, it's not just a straight line through time, and that's because as they go through their retirement plan, the upper and lower guardrails are actually adjusting through time, based on their other spending or their other income sources. So, as they get further on in their plan, and part of their plan is their portfolio is going to drop in the beginning years because they're spending more, but that's a portfolio drop that's kind of in line with the plan. It's supposed to be going down for this person because they're spending heavier. So you could see at the beginning, their portfolio balance is dropping quite precipitously, but part of that drop is due to the market falling down, or falling down. Part of that drop is due to the market going down, but also part of that drop is just attributable to that being part of the plan. They're going to spend heavier. So it's a drop that, even if markets were great, we would still expect their portfolio to go down. So as you go along, you can see here that they get really close in early 2009 to hitting that lower guardrail, really just right above it. You could even say they just kind of like barely touched it, but they don't quite go through it. And so their spending never actually ends up needing to get a downward adjustment. Now, you can see through time that portfolio adjusts, and then we go along here. This is where they're hitting that upper guardrail, then they hit it again, and again, and again. Now, with a retiree, when you choose a spending plan, there is obviously flexibility. So for this, for Jeff and Margaret, we're choosing a very conservative spending approach. And now, again, we were looking at a distribution rate of about 7.5%, but given that they have great Social Security benefits later on, this is still actually, this turns out to be a very conservative spending approach. So if they wanted to, we could actually adjust their initial spending to a higher amount. And what that would do is essentially would say, hey, if you'd like to start out spending even more, we can do that. But what it means is you just have less flex, or you'd have to be willing to take reductions in your spending. You have kind of a lower, not as large of a downward buffer. And so in this case, let's say they wanted to start out, we're going to add about $1,000 a month to their spending. Well, now it's only a 19% drop to where they'd have to take a downward adjustment of 5%, and correspondingly, they'd have to have a much higher increase in their portfolio before really it would be a great idea to increase their spending. So there's some flexibility, and it's not a right or a wrong approach here. It's really the comfort of the retiree of, hey, you know what, how willing am I to be kind of flexible with my spending and cut back a little bit in order to spend more up front. And I'll just tell you that for most retirees, especially when you're retiring early, it's those early years when people really want to get out and do things and spend more money. So being willing to be a little bit more flexible can definitely have some advantages. But, obviously it's not a right or wrong. It's just a different approach. Now, another aspect of their plan was having to provide for health insurance. And they're kind of in the dark. They don't really know what to expect as far as costs. So they had just factored in, all right, we think that insurance is going to cost somewhere between $1,000 to $2,000 a month, and they're really hoping that they could find a way to spend less on their health insurance each month. They still needed to provide it for their 2 adult children, and really this was probably the biggest hang-up for their retirement is, I don't know, we can't really afford, how can I give up my health insurance through my work if we're going to have to pay like $2,000 a month for health insurance. So the second, another step of this planning is to look at what health insurance subsidies they might be able to qualify for given the amount of spending that they need to have, just to cover their bases. And then also not just the amount of spending, but the taxation of that spending. So this is a little bit more detailed, but when it comes to taking money out of your retirement accounts, if you're pulling money out of an IRA, well, that's taxable income. If you're pulling money, on the other hand, out of a brokerage account, some of that money is going to be taxable because, you're earning interest, or maybe your portfolio is generating dividends. So that income does need to be taken into account. However, most of that income is going to come in tax-free if it's, depending on the cost basis of your portfolio. In addition, they have rental income. One of the advantages of rental income is that it's very tax preference in the U.S. tax code, because of things like the depreciation deduction. Even though they're receiving $3,000 a month of cash flow they can spend, in their case, because of depreciation expense, only about $1,500 of that shows up as taxable income. So because of that, we can go and look at, all right, what subsidies can they qualify for based on their level of income. So the first step to look at qualifying for health insurance subsidies is to see where their income will fall for the rules of the Affordable Care Act. Okay, so when it comes to qualifying for the for health insurance subsidies, the way that it's based off of your modified adjusted gross income, and the amount of income you can have and still qualify for a subsidy is different based on the number of people in your household. So for their household, they have a 4-person household for purposes of health insurance. And so what we do is we look at the number of people in their household, which is 4, and the federal poverty line for that household is $31,200. Now, if their modified adjusted gross income is less than 4 times that number, then they will qualify for health insurance subsidies, which basically means the government will cover a portion of their health insurance cost. So we look over at their household, and you can see over here on the far right that for a household of 4, the federal poverty line, 4 times that is $124,800. So looking at their plan, where they're pulling income from and everything, and including some Roth conversions, which I didn't really get into yet, their modified adjusted gross income is going to be about $120,000 a year. So with that, they're coming in under that level, and they should qualify for some health insurance subsidies. So now we can take that number and go look at healthcare.gov for their state, which is Texas, and see what plans might cost and the subsidies that they might be entitled to. So I'm going to go over to that right now, and we'll just take a look. So here we're on healthcare.gov, and we're looking at different plans. And the first step is to enter in your household information. number of people in your household, their ages. And now we're going to look at, for this 4-person household with an income of $120,000 a year, what is their expected savings that they would qualify for? So you can see here that with $120,000 a year income, what we're seeing here is they would actually qualify for a subsidy of $2,000, just over $2,000 a month. What does that mean? It means that we can go now and shop plans, and whatever the regular cost is for that plan, we take off $2,000, and that's the amount that they will pay on a monthly basis. So let's take a quick preview of those plans now. So for their area, which is just north of Dallas and Frisco, we're starting out here and looking at some high deductible plans. So this plan normally would have cost $2,152 for the household. But because they have a $2,000 a month subsidy, they would pay $139 a month. Now we can go along. This is a very high deductible plan. So we can go along and look at other plans that maybe are better suited to their particular situation and see what they would cost when we factor in the subsidy. So, and we scroll down here. So this plan here normally would have cost $2,464, but with the subsidy, they would pay $450 a month. Now that we've looked at that, all of a sudden, their healthcare expense is far more in the manageable range compared to what they were afraid that it might be, and they were pretty realistic in estimating that it was going to be somewhere maybe up towards $2,000 a month. In fact, looks like these plans were even higher than that. But because of the tax planning that with subsidies, that's going to drop down to a range, it's going to be manageable, right? These are still high deductible plans, but somebody who's in generally good health, then these are, far more manageable. So another aspect of their plan that we need to look at is, are there other ways that we can save taxes over the length of their retirement? So we looked at health insurance, and now we have to look at, is there a certain kind of sequence where we take money from? And what I mean by that is whether we take it from their IRA versus their brokerage account, in what proportions or in what sequence, in order to try and make their plan more tax efficient, because for every dollar we save in taxes, that's more money that's going to go to the client, for their spending or to pass on to their children or just increase their financial well-being. So on the screen in front of us, what we're looking at here is comparing different distribution methods to see if there's kind of an optimal strategy to reduce their taxes over time. One of the things we have to look at, we were just talking about health insurance subsidies, and to qualify for those subsidies, we have to hit certain income thresholds, stay below them. And so as we looked at the different strategies available to them, there were other strategies, or there were some strategies that showed that they would save even more taxes. However, if we went with one of those approaches, it would disqualify them from health insurance, which means they'd have to come out of pocket, another, $2,000 a month to pay for health care, which is something they certainly did not want to do. So this is really about balancing the competing priorities to find the right approach. So what we ended up settling on here was a plan to do Roth conversions, which means to proactively move money from your IRA over to a Roth account, pay taxes on that money so that that money can then grow tax-free for the remainder of your life and even be passed on to your children tax-free. And so we're really trying to find that balance of how much Roth conversion to do to still qualify for subsidies. You can see here that when we look at doing a 12% Roth conversion approach, over the life of their retirement, we're looking at dropping their total tax rate by about 9% per year on average, which is going to save them, projected to save them over $1.5 million in taxes, increase their net income by that same amount, and then even increase their net after-tax legacy by a pretty significant amount, $747,000. So with some thoughtful planning here about where you pull money from and when, and even whether or not to do proactive Roth conversions, this can have a huge beneficial impact on just improving your plan overall and increasing your financial security and giving you more money to do, the things that are important to you in retirement. So hopefully that's very helpful, and hopefully this all gives you some great ideas and insights to the questions that you ought to be asking in order to have a great early retirement. Now that you know why $1.5 million might not provide the retirement security many expect, you can take steps to strengthen your financial planning. But if you want extra help and want me to analyze your retirement strategy and show you how to maximize your security of your savings, click the link in the description and book a complimentary call, and I will see you in the next one.